Well, well, well. If it isn't Reform UK's leader, Richard Tice. And I won't spare you the details, ladies and gentlemen, before we get going, because I can already hear the people in the comments section ready to literally spike up all of their bigotry about the fact that they think I'm a communist and all this because I disagree with what precious Richard Tice has to say. But what we're about to see, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that when you actually question them about what they do, and something I've done myself before, their net zero immigration plan or policy has too many holes and there aren't enough people in the world who can make sense of it, let alone people who can actually answer for it. So, let's go!
Hi guys, Reform UK is not about winning power but steering the Conservatives of today further to the right economically. But in order to achieve that, they need to push other policies like reducing immigration. Richard Tice, the head of the company/party, was challenged on his net zero immigration policy. He claims that he can reduce net immigration to nothing by allowing only essential workers in and deporting non-necessary ones. It's a net zero sense policy which he was challenged on when he appeared on the Today programme. Have a listen to this.
We're trying to retain and attract back recently departed NHS
I understand that. Does it mean there can't be any health and care visas issued for people?
Of course not, because
so how many are you prepared to bring
our policy on immigration is that you need to freeze net immigration with the exception of essential workers. Clearly healthcare is essential, but the most...
Okay, but there's a bit of a problem with this, and as soon as you start asking questions, Reform UK's policies start to fall apart like a house of cards. Who are essential workers, Richard? I would love to ask him this question. Please define an essential worker, because if you were to ask this to Reform UK voters or supporters, they'd probably say, well, doctors and nurses are essential workers. But doctors and nurses can't operate in the hospitals or care sector without, for example, cleaners. So are cleaners essential workers? I would say they are, but I don't think...
Absolutely. Okay, first of all, I just want to say this right now. Absolutely. When I was working throughout the pandemic as the COVID-19 touchpoint cleaner, I was classified as an essential worker. So, yes, cleaners are essential workers, and I will literally stand by that until the very day I die. Don't knock cleaners, ladies and gentlemen. They are essential workers.
Reform UK would deem them essential workers. What about admin staff? To do the paperwork, the bureaucracy, are they essential workers? What about people who work either indirectly or directly with the NHS and are not doctors, nurses, cleaners or admin staff? So as soon as you start asking these questions, who is an essential worker and who isn't, then the whole argument falls apart. It's not very well thought out, but as I said, Reform UK don't exist to actually get into power and implement policies. It's about pushing the Conservatives further to the right.
So that's an exception to your net zero immigration pledge.
That's right, because we say non-essential and healthcare is essential. We've got to get to zero waiting lists within 2 years. We're the only party with that ambition. It's not easy, but it's about a 20% increase in appointments and operations. And there are many businesses that grow at that sort of rate. It requires productivity improvements. It requires...
The NHS is not a business. My goodness, this guy thinks the NHS can be run like a business, using business logic in the NHS. This is insane.
Yeah.
The NHS is not a business. You can't apply business logic to it. It has to have things like contingency, redundancy, because it has to deal with crises that businesses don't normally have to deal with. This is insane. You need to have extra staff because maybe they're...
Yeah, crises such as, let's say, a pandemic. You know what? At least I could say that in 40 years' time, ladies and gentlemen, I could say I lived through a pandemic. I have no idea about if another pandemic will ever happen again in my lifetime, but if we do and we have not learned our lessons the first time, there's going to be even more on the horizon.
There's a crisis, a car accident. You need to have doctors and nurses sitting around waiting for an emergency. You can't apply business logic to the NHS. You need to have extra resources sitting around in case of an emergency, in case of a crisis. For example, the winter crisis. You need to have things like this in place because it's a public service. It's not a business. Why is this so difficult for people to understand? Like, I don't think Richard Tice is stupid. I think he's lying here, or he's pretending not to understand. It has to be the case. He can't really be that stupid.
Logistics improvements.
Yeah, but
we need new people to come into the NHS to help
and as you've acknowledged, some of those would come into the NHS and the care sector from
help drive. He's still using terminology as though the NHS was a business.
Outside. So what's the annual number of people that you would be willing to bring in from outside the UK to work in the NHS?
Well, that's a function of what the NHS needs, but also...
He can't answer the question, because as soon as he puts a number on it, then that number would fall apart. Also, as we've seen with the Conservatives, what they're saying is, well, we just want doctors and nurses. Or, for example, in the care sector, we just want carers. But we don't want them to bring their families with them. But by doing that... And I imagine Reform UK would copy such a policy. But by doing that, you're discouraging the staff that you need. Because if you don't provide a welcoming environment, you don't provide a situation where they can take their families with them, where will they go? Well, they'll go to Canada, or they'll go to Australia, or they'll go to another country where this is actually permitted. And then you're going to lose the staff, and you're not going to be able to deal with the crisis.
So it's the independent sector.
But it would be quite an urgent imperative, wouldn't it, if you're trying to get net waiting list down to 0 within 2 years?
Absolutely. But the key point is, whether it's the independent sector or the NHS, with extra money going into into healthcare, then we can drive that improvement in productivity, that 20% increase that's required to get them to that. And that's why we've allocated the extra money in order for the staffing.
Raised from the £17 billion, which is presumably an annual figure.
That's an annual figure.
For those first 2 years, where would you get the
annual cost
billion?
to the taxpayer of net zero is over £30 billion. One of our policies is to scrap net zero. That provides...
My goodness. Okay, this is beyond a joke. So what he's trying to do is suggest, and this is probably the thinking of Reform UK voters, that there's a big pile of cash sitting in a bank vault somewhere, maybe at the back of Westminster or something. There's a big pile of cash, and what the government do is they go there and they fill up suitcases or whatever, and they use that to pay for public services. Richard, this is not how the economy works. My goodness. He actually thinks that there's a big pile of cash, and what you do is, well, we're not going to spend it on net zero, we're going to spend it on the NHS. That's not how it works, Richard. I'm starting to question. At the beginning, I thought, maybe this guy can't be really that stupid. But he defeats that by presenting really stupid arguments. First of all, net zero when it comes to immigration, we're going to, for everyone that comes in, somebody else is going to go out. Now, we don't know how that's actually going to work, but even if it were to work, well, who is an essential worker? He hasn't defined who an essential worker is. And then when it comes to funding a policy about bringing the waiting list down to zero in 2 years...
Trifle ambitious.
He's saying, well, we're going to fund it by not spending money on net zero. Okay. Oh, my goodness, this is beyond a joke. But, of course, it's a joke party. It's not a real, serious political organisation. I keep saying it's about driving a wedge in the voter bloc, within who normally vote for the Conservatives, and forcing the Conservative Party to adopt more extreme policies, and eventually, of course, economic policies that are principally cutting taxes for the richest in society, reducing regulations on businesses, and stripping away worker protections. That's what it's all about. That's the goal of Reform UK. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I think when Labour get into power and they're in government, Reform UK are not going to disappear. They're going to be still pushing this idea that the way to grow the economy is cutting taxes on the richest in society, trickle-down economics. Remember how that works so well. This is their goal. And when Labour are in power, they're going to push for the government to be more to be stricter on immigration, to reduce immigration. They're going to. It's exactly the same rhetoric that we're hearing now. You're going to hear when Labour are in power. Labour are not bringing down immigration. Immigration is the problem. You can't have public services if there are too many people in the country. Stuff like this, and while the focus is at the moment on pushing the Conservatives in one direction. I think the focus when Labour are in power is about pushing them further to the right. It needs to be pushed back on. This sort of rubbish rhetoric needs to be called out. If you want to reduce the NHS waiting list, you need to bring in workers. You can't train up enough at the moment.
Or even if you want to talk about bringing essential workers, open up more opportunities for people who are already in this country already. Or even if it's not about the NHS, what about for schooling? What about for essential businesses like the production of steel or iron or copper or things that we need, or to open up opportunities like apprentices to work for like work on oil rigs, or work for basically what I'm trying to say is that create jobs, create opportunities, create every kind of because again, if you want to take a look at I'll let the video finish first.
Moment, so you have to bring people in from abroad. If you want to bring people in, you need to make it a welcoming society. You need to say, yes, you can bring your family with you. That's what you need to do. You need to properly fund the NHS and not run it like a business, because it's not. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated.
So what I was going to suggest just a while ago is the fact that the Japanese, for example, they literally have people who stand on the streets handing out flyers and handing out samples to represent like discotheques, bars, taverns, but businesses like small arcades to casinos. They will have like mascots or just people just handing out flyers. They do that because it drives unemployment into very, very small figures, and the relation that the Japanese have towards the unemployed, specifically in their country, is so vastly different to ours. And if you're thinking for one moment that that nobody would agree to this policy, or agree to the idea of wanting to create more jobs for everyone to get involved in, well, then why are we still then? What exactly is the solution then? Because the solution is that if you're that worried and paranoid about so many people going to be on universal credit and job seekers allowance, and there are jobs going but nobody will want to hire them, then, well, what happens if a business just decides that they don't need anybody else and they lay off a lot of people? There also needs to be a consistent pattern between people who are, who want to work, who are more than happy to do what it takes, to the sort of people who literally will say they are going to give people the opportunities but won't actually do it. Because it's not even something that's just lost on other businesses. It's something that the NHS is so keen to not push this agenda either. But if Richard Tice had anything to do it, well, they wouldn't. Because you wouldn't, by Richard Tice's logic, he should be hiring any person who wants to work for the NHS because they'll be classified as an essential worker. That's his logic. But whether it actually works, you tell me. And with all that being said and done, I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I cannot wait to see you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.